In this video, we'll be reviewing the trig functions, all 6 of them: sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent, be that in a triangle or the unit circle. So the first one we have is the sine of theta. Now recall, in a triangle, that is the opposite over hypotenuse. Now again, remember that this is the sine of some angle compares the two sides, the opposite side over the hypotenuse side, in that ratio. And every single triangle that I look at, the sine of theta will always be equal to the same ratio, depending on the angle being always the same. Now this detail right here always comes based on a triangle. We also have another form of looking at this, and that's in the unit circle. And in the unit circle, this is nothing more than y over 1, or just y. Then you also have cosine. Cosine of theta is nothing more than the adjacent over the hypotenuse. In that form, again, in the unit circle, we're going to have that as just being x. So those are the two base trig functions, and all trig functions will be devised from those two. Your next one is going to be tangent. Tangent of theta, I'm going to write it off to the side here, is nothing more than sine of theta over cosine of theta. Now this identity right here is what we call a quotient identity. We're going to have to make sure we have those memorized. Now the tangent is equal to the opposite over the adjacent. And recall again, the opposite over the adjacent, it's the same thing as putting the opposite over hypotenuse divided by the adjacent over the hypotenuse, getting sine and cosine. Now inside the unit circle, this is again sine over cosine, where sine is y and cosine is x, so you end up with this. So there are your 3 basic trig functions. Again, tangent is the first one devised of sine and cosine are basically their single entities all on their own. After that, you get to the reciprocal identities, or the reciprocal trig functions, where you have cosecant, and cosecant is 1 over sine. You have secant, where secant is 1 over cosine. And then you have cotangent, where cotangent is 1 over tangent, or, more appropriately, cosine of theta over the sine of theta. Now notice how every time I said these things I left out the unit theta. Keep in mind that theta has to be inside that trig function every single time that you use these trig functions, otherwise they don't necessarily apply efficiently. Now cosecant, given that it is sine, the reciprocal of sine is just going to be the hypotenuse over the opposite. And at this point I'm going to get lazy about writing these things here. I'm just going to go ahead and use h for hypotenuse and a for adjacent, as well as o for my opposite. So I have a over o in this case, because again cotangent is a reciprocal of tangent, so I'm just flipping that. And again, all these things here just become flipped inside of our basic trig identity rules. So there you have it. That is the review of all those trig functions. We also have again our quotient, as well as our reciprocal identities. Now these identities are the start of all identities that we're going to end up playing with, and they're extremely important for us to make sure we have these ones memorized.